covering the years 1791 to 1825. Having talked last time about the American and French revolutions, we're now shifting our focus to first Haiti and then to Central and South America. So let's open in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this time that we have together. Thank you for these students and for all that you are teaching us about you and about your world. Father, we pray that you would give us wisdom and insight and discernment as we learn, that we might honor you with the things that you teach us. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, revolutions. John Green, being a good Marxist, is a kind of a fan of revolutions. He likes it when power structures get overthrown and when the masses revolt. But revolutions are not simple, and he does a good job of honestly saying that sometimes revolutions just don't work out very well. Sometimes what you end up with after the revolution is just as bad, if not worse, than what you had before the revolution happened. And so we can see this through comparing and contrasting the American Revolution, which was very successful, reasonably orderly and disciplined and unified and based in the traditions of law throughout English civil law history as well as natural law, and created a just and stable government that has been the longest lasting government in the world. We have the oldest functioning constitution in America, and our revolution has been the most stable and successful revolution in the world in the last 300 or 400 years. So that's, sort of case A of how things can go right. And then we looked at the French Revolution last time as a case of how things can go wrong. In the French Revolution, you had much more of an anti-religious perspective, much more secular thinking. The Enlightenment in France was much more radical than it had been in Great Britain. And so you had a revolution in France that was more unstable, unpredictable, subject to the whims of the moment. It was more revolutionary in the true sense of trying to destroy and obliterate and overthrow the power structures, rather than trying to provide for a level of reform and the rule of law from within an established tradition. So the revolutions in Central and South America and Haiti are going to look more like the French Revolution. And we're going to see that as that unfolds, and we're going to take a look at why, and then we're going to wrap up at the end with a little bit of fodder for what might become an essay test exam question on why is it that revolutions sometimes don't succeed in accomplishing the goals of the revolutionaries. So we're looking at Haiti, and we're looking at Latin America. Personally, I'm excited that there's one video that's about Haiti, because Haiti is one of the places where we are engaged as a church in doing mission work, and it's a place where I was in July for a week, and it's a country that I've come to love and to learn some about their history and their culture, and so I'm glad we have some time to think about that together. Latin America, here's a couple of maps just to look at and think about. Latin America in 1800 and Latin America in 1830. So in 1800, Saint Dominique was still a French colony. It would later become known as Haiti. And so you had some French colonies there, and then you have mostly Spanish colonies and the big Portuguese colony, of course, of the Viceroyalty of Brazil. And then look, by 1830, everything becomes purple. Independent countries: Mexico, Honduras, Colombia, Bolivia, Brazil, Paraguay. All of these countries become independent during this 30-year period of time. And really, we're going to start looking at things in 1791, which is when the revolution in Haiti begins. And then the close of this period is roughly 1825, but 1830 is a good estimate too. So it's kind of a a period of time. It's not one revolution, but it's a whole series of revolutions. There are two people in particular who have become major heroes to those who love revolutions and who have studied these revolutions. Toussaint Louverture in Haiti and Simón Bolivar in Latin America. These two men led revolutions against the establishment, against the colonial powers. Toussaint Louverture led the revolution in Haiti against the French. The international airport in Port-au-Prince is named for him. It's the Toussaint Louverture International Airport. And Simón Bolivar has much more than just an airport named after him, as John Green pointed out. Bolivia is named after Bolivar, as well as some currency. These guys are considered to be heroes, and yet the truth of their actions and their character is much more complicated than that. They were revolutionaries, but as too often happens in revolutions that are not grounded in law, in a respect for human life and property rights and the things that make for a just and free society, these guys became power-hungry dictators and ended up undermining much of the revolutionary spirit that they themselves sought to embody and to advance. So those would be two guys that we're going to talk about, and two names that you should probably remember and associate with Haiti and with South America, Latin American revolutionary movements. All right, we're going to start by taking a look at Haiti in the 1700s. Haiti was the most valuable colony in the West Indies in the 1700s because of two very lucrative cash crops, sugar and coffee. Some of you enjoy those two things together, sugar and coffee. And Haiti itself, produced 40% of the sugar in Europe and 60% of the coffee. One of the things I learned when we were in Haiti is that Haitian coffee is very, very good. Very high quality, very smooth, very rich. Really enjoyed the coffee in Haiti. But what's interesting today, in the 1700s, 60% of the coffee in Europe came from Haiti. But today, if you go to a grocery store or Starbucks, you say, I want some Haitian coffee, they're not going to have any available. And that's part of the sad story of Haiti, is that much of what made Haiti the most valuable colony in the 1700s, they are not taking advantage of for their economic well-being here in the 21st century. Now, sadly, the economy in Haiti was based upon slave labor. Part of the reason why they were able to make such a large profit on sugar and coffee is because they had slave labor. There were the second most number of slaves in Haiti as any other colony in the Western Hemisphere. Only Brazil had more. They imported every year approximately 40,000 slaves. Basically, as many slaves were brought in every year as the total population of whites in Haiti. So there were about 40,000 whites between the Grand Blanc, the rich whites, and the Petit Blanc, the poor whites. There were approximately 30 to 40,000, and yet they would bring in 40,000 new slaves every year. Why were they having to bring in so many slaves every year? Well, the simple answer is that the slaves kept dying. And the reason why they were dying is because the work conditions on the Haitian plantations were extremely harsh and brutal. And also there were a high rates of yellow fever and smallpox that killed off large numbers of slaves in particular. So they needed to keep bringing in fresh supplies of slaves because the slaves that were there were being beaten and worked to death and were also dying from yellow fever and smallpox. Now, there were these four groups within Haiti that he talked about in the video. There were the Grand Blanc. They were at the top of the social structure. They were rich white people, landowners, plantation owners. But then there were also free blacks and free mulattoes. Mulatto is someone who's half black, half white. So the free blacks and free mulattoes, who also, many of them owned plantations, many of them owned slaves. And then there were the Petit Blanc. And the Petit Blanc, or small white, are those poor whites. And they were in a position where they were white, but they didn't have money. And so they resented the free blacks who were wealthier than they were and who owned plantations and slaves. And so they wanted more of a race-based system rather than free versus slave. They wanted it more exclusively black versus white, which it was not the case. It wasn't race-based in Haiti. It was, but there was a huge demarcation between slave and free. And then the vast majority of the population, some 90% plus of the population, were slaves. Haitian unrest was first sparked in 1789 by the French Revolution. So the French Revolution was happening in France, and the Haitian slaves got word of a rumor that King Louis XVI had freed all the slaves in the French colonies. Of course, he had done no such thing, but it was a rumor that they had heard, and so they started a little uprising, which was put down, but it was bloody. And then in 1791, there was a larger and more organized slave revolt, and this is the one that was led by Toussaint Louverture. And Toussaint Louverture helped to organize the slaves into a disciplined army. He taught them Western-style warfare tactics as well as guerrilla warfare tactics that they were able to use effectively against the French forces. Now, 1791, France is fighting against Great Britain, against Spain. In the middle of the Revolution, France was dealing with a lot of turmoil and upheaval at home, and so it needed to sort of reduce the number of problems it was having to deal with. It had to simplify and streamline where it was focusing its military strength. And so France decided one way to do this would be to go ahead and free the slaves in the Caribbean, and that way the slaves in Haiti would stop having these revolts and these rebellions and leading these armed uprisings because they would be free. And so in 1794, this finally takes place in February, and all the slaves in French colonies receive their freedom. February 1794. So now, Toussaint Louverture, he is French, and he is helping to establish a better society within Haiti with free people. But of course, you probably know it's not really that simple, because what he actually ends up doing is in 1801, about 6 years later, he ends up creating a constitution on July 7th, 1801, that gives him authority over the entire island of Hispaniola and made him the governor general for life with near absolute powers. Now, the Constitution also was seeking to permanently abolish slavery and to reform land ownership, but Toussaint was not a democratic-minded, humble, rule of law oriented guy. He was somebody who took to himself almost unlimited power and became, in essence, a dictator of Haiti during the last few years of his life, which is why initially when Napoleon's forces show up in 1804 and they are, or in 1802, and they take Toussaint Louverture back to France as a prisoner, that's okay with the Haitians because they've actually come to resent this guy who ended slavery but did not end up really setting people free, just changed one form of tyranny for another. And so this second phase of the Haitian Revolution is the fight for independence from France. And the French clearly had superior training and weaponry, but the Haitians fought a guerrilla war, and by fighting a guerrilla war, they were able to successfully ambush and attack the French and harass them. But the Haitians also had a significant weapon on their side, and that was disease. Yellow fever and smallpox. Many of the Haitians had developed immunity to these diseases because of having lived in the climate. And so the French troops who came over, many of them died, including the general who was a nephew of Napoleon's, who was leading the French effort to subjugate the Haitian Revolution. So by 1802, Haiti becomes independent, and Napoleon loses his cash colony. He was counting on Haiti to provide him with income so that he could reestablish and reassert the French Empire in the New World. Remember, France had lost most of its valuable New World colonies during the 7 Years' War, which they lost to Great Britain, 1763. So Napoleon was trying to reassert these things 40 years later, and the loss of Haiti meant that basically Napoleon had to give up on ever reasserting a French empire in the Western Hemisphere. And it's as a result of that he ends up deciding to sell the remaining territory they have, Louisiana, the Louisiana Purchase, to Thomas Jefferson in 1803. So Haiti in 1802 becomes just the second free and independent nation state in the Americas. It's also, the Haitian Revolution was the most successful slave revolt ever. So what began as a slave uprising, 1791, ends 11 years later with an independent nation state. Haiti also becomes the first modern nation state to be governed by people of African descent, and it ends Napoleon's dream of a world empire that would include Europe and the New World. And it leads to the Louisiana Purchase, which doubles the size of the United States territorially under Jefferson's presidency. So it's important for many reasons, but it's also important for us because it is an example of what can go wrong in a revolution. Haiti has been independent now for 116 years, but they are by far the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, and there are many reasons for that. Haiti has been a country that has been plagued by corruption and natural disaster, and their economy has been stunted because of insecure property rights. There are, basically because of governmental corruption in Haiti, you can never know for sure if your property is going to remain your property. If it becomes valuable enough that someone powerful wants it, they can probably pay somebody off in the government and get it. So insecure property rights, political corruption, a lack of the rule of law has caused Haiti to be a very poor country for the last 116 years. An example of this sort of corruption and bad governance can be seen in the first ruler of the independent Haiti under the 1805 Constitution, and that is Jean-Jacques Dessalines. And Jean-Jacques Dessalines is the first president of Haiti under the 1805, under the fully independent Constitution. Now, he began as a president, sort of governor general, but he is later named Emperor Jacques I of Haiti. So they trade in French dominance for a Haitian monarchy. And it's the generals of the Haitian Revolution Army who name him this. So it is a military dictatorship is really what it is. On January 1st, 1804, Dessalines proclaimed Haiti as an independent nation, and he gave the order later that year to all cities in Haiti that all white men should be put to death. He specified that all white men should be put to death with silent weapons, such as knives and bayonets, rather than gunfire, so that the killing could be done more quietly and could avoid warning the intended victims by the sound of gunfire and thereby giving them the opportunity to escape. This is a brutal massacre of between 3,500 and 5,000 white men, and basically every white male, adult white male in Haiti was killed. And then later orders were given to massacre women and children as well, until basically every white person in Haiti was killed or forced to flee for their life. And for many, many years, it was illegal for anyone white to live in Haiti. So they end up having a revolution, but the revolution ends up giving in to the hatred and the racism that had caused life to be so miserable for slaves in the first place. Because the revolution was not supported, it was not built upon the principles that make for a free and just society. Let's take a break now as we prepare to transition to the Latin American revolutions. We're going to take a break here and just update our timeline that we've been building. So that you should be familiar with these first 13 dates that we've gone over. And you can see them here. And we're going to add several more. Starting with some things we've already talked about. 1607 was the first permanent English colony in North America, Jamestown. And then 1756 to 1763 was the 7 Years' War, fought between England and France over land and trade, won by the English, which gave them Canada and the land of the Ohio River Valley. But they closed off the new land to American settlement. That and the Stamp Act and the Quartering Act of 1765 lead to the American Revolution. Now, I'm dating the beginning of the American Revolution in 1765 because that's when Americans began to organize themselves to resist parliamentary rule of America by boycotting the Stamp Act. So the American Revolution is 1765 to 1776. 1776 is the end of the Revolution because that's when independence was declared. Now it would take another 7 years before that independence was secured. And so there is the American War for Independence, which is 1775 to 1783. These two things overlap each other, but they are distinct. The American Revolution is an ideological movement for independence, and the American War for Independence is the military struggle to secure that independence. The French Revolution happens from 1789 to 1804. The last couple years of that, Napoleon is ruling France, but in 1804 he officially declares himself the Emperor of France, and that means the revolution is at an end. 1802, Haiti is given a level of independence. It takes a little bit before that's really secure in 1804, but that leads to the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. And then we're going to talk now about the rest of Latin America becoming independent in the years 1808 to 1825. So in Latin American society, what three institutions exercised control over the population? They were the crown, the church, and the patriarchal structure of society. So the crown, whether that was the Spanish crown or the Portuguese crown, these were monarchies that ruled over their colonies. The Catholic Church, both Portugal and Spain, Catholic countries, so Catholic colonies. The Catholic Church, centrally important, still centrally important throughout Latin America. And patriarchy. Patriarchy still continues to be centrally important throughout Latin America as well. It's an important part of Latino culture. What is transculturation and why is it significant? This is something John Green talked about in the video. Transculturation is the blending of cultures. And so you can see there are Latin American and African influences on Christianity, and there are European influences on life in Latin America, And so there's a blending of these three cultures, of the European, the Native American, and the African cultures are kind of blending racially, culturally, and you can see it in food, and you can see it in music, and you can see it in fashion, and you can see it in religion. It really is a blending of cultures throughout Latin America. And by about 1800, just speaking racially, by about 1800, about 25% of Latin America's population were multiracial. Some were a blend of Native American and European, some were a blend of African and European, but racial dynamics become important for understanding the power structures in Latin America. So, the Portuguese royal family. Napoleon ends up playing an important role in the independence of Brazil because when Napoleon takes over Portugal in 1807, the Portuguese royal family flees for safety to Brazil. And so they live in Brazil for some time. But then in 1808, or a little bit later than that, they're able to go back to Portugal. But Prince Pedro, who is the son of the king of Portugal, decides that rather than go back to Portugal and be the prince, he would rather stay in Brazil and be the king. And so he is persuaded by the Brazilian party to become king of a newly independent Brazil. He is very popular. He is successful in being able to break away. Basically, the father gives the son the kingdom, and so Prince Pedro of Portugal becomes King Pedro I of Brazil, and that's how Brazil becomes independent. It's purple. In Mexico, a couple of priests had an important role in Mexico's road to independence. Hidalgo and Morales. But the liberator, the big hero in Latin American culture is Simón Bolivar. And Bolivar was one who realized that instead of having these different Latin American colonies all struggling for independence independently of each other, he realized it would make much more sense to unite the colonies together as a South American culture to declare independence from Spain. And so he was able to unite the peoples of many different South American Spanish colonies and to lead them in a revolution against Spain. But then he became essentially the dictator of this new country called Gran Colombia, and it essentially comprises the northern part of South America. So if you look at the map that we were looking at before, many of the countries that are along the north of South America, Venezuela, Colombia, they all become a part of this Gran Colombia, where Simón Bolivar is the president. He becomes president by uniting the people, by getting them to focus on the fact that whatever differences they have, what they have in common is the fact that they are all South American. They are not Spanish. They were not born in Spain or raised in Spain. So whether they were white, black, native, mixed, they were all South American. And so he was very effective at leading people to see themselves as one people. The end result of all of this activity was that by 1825, almost all of the Western Hemisphere was free of European rule. with the exception of a couple of islands in the Caribbean, and of course Canada. But Canada is a different story. So what's important is this happens by 1825, and in 1823, the American president, James Monroe, issues what becomes known as the Monroe Doctrine, and it's been a key aspect of American foreign policy since 1825. And the Monroe Doctrine, issued by James Monroe, basically said to Europe, stay out of the Western Hemisphere. You've had your time. You ran colonies over here for 300 years, but those colonies are independent now. So we as America are saying to you in Europe, stay out of the Western Hemisphere, or we will force you to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. And this is important within world history because it's one of the key steps that America makes early in her life to being a global power. So that happens in 1825. Okay, as we wrap up for today, I want us to just think for a minute about revolution and revolutionaries. If you study revolutionary history around the world, it really doesn't matter if you're talking about Mao Zedong in China, or Lenin and Stalin in Russia, or Idi Amin in Uganda, or you could pick almost any spot on the globe, and you could find a revolutionary who turns into a harsh dictator. But that did not happen with George Washington. He didn't become emperor for life or King George I of America. And there are a couple of other exceptions to that. The Dutch, when they gained independence from Spain, they established the Republic of the Netherlands. The Swiss, when they gained their independence, they became the Swiss Confederation and a Swiss Republic. So there are a few examples, but for the most part, Napoleon becomes emperor. This happens again and again, and we see a couple of examples of it with these guys in Haiti and in Latin America. Why does that happen? Well, it happens because the societies are not being built on the foundation stones that are necessary for having a free and just society. Again, no society in this world is ever perfectly free and perfectly just, but there are some big ideas that matter, and these are the ones that we've been talking about in this class, and I think this is a great opportunity for us to revisit them. Human dignity and equality, yet humility. You have to believe that human beings have dignity and equality, and yet that human beings also cannot be trusted with absolute power. So human beings are of infinite worth because we are made in the image of God, and yet we are not to be trusted with too much power because we are fallen and sinful in our nature. So understanding human dignity and equality and yet humility keeps someone like George Washington from making himself king for life, because people knew that as noble a man as George Washington was, he wasn't someone to be trusted with absolute power, and he knew that about himself. The second big idea is that the universe is basically orderly, predictable, and knowable. This allows for the development of science and philosophy, political science, the study of cultures and what makes for a just and free society and what doesn't. And so this understanding of the universe is important. The universe is not just chaotic, as John Green would have us believe. It's not completely unpredictable. It's not completely out of control. There are things that you can know, and there are things that you can predict, and that allows for a rational and scientific and reasonable approach to life. The third big idea is natural law. You have to believe in natural law. There's a universal, transcendent moral law that is woven into the fabric of creation, and that is discoverable by people. you can see that wrong things are wrong and that they lead to bad consequences, that right things are right and they lead to good consequences. God's universe is a moral universe in the very fabric of it. The fourth is property rights. You have to have secure property, or you cannot have private enterprise. You cannot have people who have a good work ethic, because they won't be able to trust that anything they work for could ever be theirs, really. And then the fifth thing you need a constitutional government that limits power through checks and balances and that upholds the rule of law. So, you can have a constitution. That doesn't make your government constitutional and having the rule of law, because your constitution could say, Toussaint Louverture is the absolute ruler of Haiti for life. Well, that's not a constitution that establishes the rule of law. That's a constitution that establishes the rule of one man over everyone else. So again, we come back to these five big ideas, and we can see in Haiti and in Latin America that these five big ideas were not in place. They were not, some of them were and some of them weren't, but they were not all well established. You had a lot of racism, and so number one was called into question because you had a lot of racial tension and racial resentment and racism. You had sort of an embracing of the idea of a chaotic world, an unpredictable world, a world where you have to grab things by force and by power, that you can't do things in an orderly and reasonable way. You have an understanding that might makes right, and that if we can win it, we should do it instead of natural law. There's no understanding of secure property rights, and there's no limit on governmental power through a constitution that establishes the rule of law. So that's why these revolutions in Haiti and in Latin America largely are unsuccessful, and it takes a long time for these principles to be established within these countries. Okay, well, that's about all we need to cover for today, and so I will see you guys in class on Thursday as we continue working our way through Rodney Stark's book together. So I'll see you later.